going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 84 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. For the first hour, we are continuing our study of closed work permits and temporary foreign workers. I'm pleased to welcome the following witnesses. Mr. Redikoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before we get going, again, I want to ask a quick question. We have three motions on the floor that have been approved by the committee to have the minister come, and I see that he is coming on one of those, so that's a good thing. But the other two, he has still not given us a date for. Can you advise if he's given us a date or what the status of that is?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Redikoff. As usual, our clerk is working very hard to secure the minister, and we as a committee do not control, and I as a chair do not control his schedule, and neither does Mr. Clerk. But we can tell you that every effort is made for him to come to this committee. He's been here already twice, and he has already committed to us on December the 5th, and we will make sure that we continue to do our part as chair of the committee and clerk here representing us as a clerk of the committee, and rest assured that that this will happen. And in fact, we are also able to secure UN Rapporteur on December the 7th. I think if we take those two dates into consideration, then we have only 2 more meetings left. And I'm not sure whether the minister is available, but we certainly will send a request in and do every effort to ask him to come to this meeting.
So has he given any indications about those last 2 meetings to you or the clerk?
Right now, the only thing that's confirmed is December the 5th, which is to do with the supplementary estimates. But rest assured, I as a chair will give a request to our clerk to make sure that every effort is put in, and he's doing a great job as a clerk. So I do commend him, and he's very non-partisan, as you know. So he will do every effort to work on our behalf, all of us. Thank you. And now, on behalf of the committee, as its chair, I would love to welcome the following witnesses among us. We have Madam Gagnon is present with us physically here, and Mr. Bora is also here in the room, and online we also welcome Mr. Chambers. And with this, I will open the floor to Mr. Bora for 5 minutes, and then Madam Gagnon after that. Mr. Bora, go ahead for 5 minutes of an opening statement.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present the position of CIMM on closed work permits. I think that the work permits work. There's not a problem with the work permit. I think what makes a lot of headlines is that the lack of pathway for temporary foreign workers, especially in agriculture or in low-wage sector, to have access to a permanent residency. And I think that's where a lot of the problems come in the news. Because, as I mentioned in my notes, a lot of the workers that we bring to Quebec and in the farms come for temporary periods. The average is about 22 weeks. So that's the need of the employers in agricultural farms. It's very specific time that they require the workers. These workers help so that thousands of families could have fresh produce of good quality in their houses. Thousands of companies, farms that are able to continue producing, continue developing the rural areas of Quebec, and also helps thousands of workers and their families to improve their livelihoods in their countries. We, in CIMM, we try to bring workers for an average of 8 months and have recurring workers for companies that require workers for a year or 2 years. We prefer to have them come for 8 months and then have rotations of workers. That way, the main reason why the workers come to Canada is to improve the livelihoods of their families. So if the workers are for many years or for many months away from their households. We don't think it's a good way to help the workers or their families. So 8 months, I think, should be enough. That's why temporary work permits work for us. In the sense that the closed work permits force a worker to stay at the farm, I think the government already put in place mechanisms to help these workers that find themselves in a bad situation to change an employer. Now with the new open work permit for vulnerable workers, or in the SOP program, there is also a possibility for the if the government agent feels that the employee is not in a good position, they could request Service Canada to change the workers. So I think there's options for the workers to be in a better position if they need to be. Also, something that wasn't discussed, in case that there's a closed work permit board for a specific sector, if an employee comes to Quebec and then decides that he doesn't want to stay at the farm, how will we be able to change? How is the employer that brings it, that pays a plane ticket to bring him up, how will he reimbursed? Is he going to be reimbursed, or just anybody that decides that maybe the next farm is going to give him $1 more? Is that a sufficient reason to change employers? So those things need to be considered if we're going to move forward into an open work permit on a sectoral basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bora. 3.5 minutes. And now we will go to Madame Gagnon. Madame Gagnon, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I'll be speaking in French, thanking you for welcoming us from the Ramtak. And I apologize, my colleague's going to be arriving soon. He came by road from Sherbrooke. He was engaged in another activity. We're at a rush period at the moment, a peak period. RATMAC is an advocacy network comprising a number of subgroups across Quebec that advocate for the rights of migrant workers. And they have come together under that our umbrella organisation, not only to support workers, but to ensure that their rights are upheld. As we're a not-for-profit organisation now, and we are independent, funded by the Ministry of Immigration of Quebec. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to provide a brief per se, but only a longer brief. And we do have a brief about the immigration planning vis-à-vis temporary foreign workers, and especially to do with closed work permits. And as my colleague just mentioned, this is an issue when it comes to access to permanent residency for those people that we represent. And just like the UN rapporteur, we agree that this is creating a serious problem of rights being flouted. There are rights that are recognized in our charters and in trade agreements with Mexico, for example, when it comes to workers' rights here in Canada. But unfortunately, the workers have under the barrel of the gun, because they are constantly faced with the threat of having to go back to their countries of origins. And this is an issue to do with upholding their rights, and the employer often doesn't do that adequately. The minister is looking at the idea of sector work permits. There's no decision that's been made yet. We don't want big conglomerates of employers to take control either. We want individual rights to be upheld and protected. Not all employers mistreat employees, but there are nevertheless some cases that have made the headlines in Quebec, and this is a serious state of affairs. Therefore, we need to address this scourge. And the UPA in Quebec has recognized that if we do resolve those particular situations, that will make for better competition among farmers and food processors throughout Quebec. Now, our services are entirely free of charge. We are funded by civil society and the Ministry of Immigration in Quebec. From an economic standpoint, we agree that we need to promote access to permanent residency and attract to citizenship, because these workers are already working in our regions. And it's difficult to get folks to work in the regions in Quebec in particular. They've learned French, many of them. Not all of them, but many have been there for many years. They don't see their families, they don't see their children growing up. So in our opinion, the whole system needs to be overhauled with a view to making their lives easier, but also those of the producers and employers themselves who are doing it tough these times. So we believe that there should be decent wages and decent work. There are 4 pillars to this. International standards must apply, including the right to association, which has also been constrained in Quebec over recent years, social protection, access to insurance, employment insurance. It's very difficult for those folks that we represent. The lack of discrimination, a social dialogue. If there are no mechanisms for social dialogue and for unionisation, well, things will go nowhere, because these individuals aren't able to stand up for themselves. So eventually, hopefully, RATMAC will no longer even exist because we won't be needed anymore. But we have supported thousands of migrant workers to help them settle into Quebec society. Here's my colleague who's just arriving now. He's responsible for legal matters and to do with occupational health and safety. I think I will have run out of my 5 minutes perhaps by now.
Thank you, Madam Gagnon. And on behalf of the committee, as chair, I would love to welcome Mr. Michel Pilot. And I know there was traffic on the way, but welcome to the committee meeting here. And now we will go virtual to Mr. Chambers. Mr. Chambers, you have 5 minutes for the opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the opportunity for me to speak on the subject of this closed work permits today. My name is Mark Chambers, and I'm the VP of Canadian Pork Production for Sunterra Farms. Sunterra is a value-added food production company based in Alberta. We have primary agricultural production with grain, hogs, pork processing, salami plant, and a greenhouse division producing strawberries and tomatoes. We also have a retail division in stores in Calgary, Red Deer, and Edmonton, providing groceries to Alberta consumers. Sunterra, like many other businesses in Canada, have been using a temporary farm worker program for many years with great success. Most of the program for us has been used through closed work permits under the temporary farm worker program, LMIA dependent permits. It's enabled us to continue our operation with success, and just like many other businesses in Canada, especially in tight labour markets. At Sunterra, we've used the program as a stepping stone for year-round employees to transition to become a permanent resident of Canada. As an employer, we provide the guidance, help that accesses the different PR streams while the employees continue to work. On many occasions, when a temporary farm worker arrives to a rural community, they transition to a PR, and then they bring their family and stay in that rural community. And that's been a real pillar for us. This program has been a cornerstone in maintaining the balance of labour markets and safeguarding the interests of Canadians as well. And it's especially true for ag and agri-food businesses. They are located in rural parts of Canada. And we know that we have rural depopulation occurring in Canada. So recruiting Canadians to fill vacant positions can be very difficult. While this program has been good for our business, it doesn't come without its costs and challenges, because there's 4 arms of the government that are involved to facilitate this program, and that is ESDC, Service Canada, IRCC, and the CBSA. And as you can imagine, having all 4 departments work in sync can be a little bit of a challenge. And very often changes occur to the program. It's a very fluid program, and they're not always positive for users of the program. And I do understand at times the temporary farm worker program is a little bit of a hot potato, but today they've introduced newer rules with ongoing inspections and unannounced inspections to ensure that the program is delivering the requirements to the employees that are using the program. The program has made some great progress on reducing the times it takes to obtain an LMIA, Labour Market Impact Assessment, and that's through ESDC and Service Canada's efforts. So they've done a great job of that. But there's still a challenge on the side of IRCC that to times to process work permits, even within Canada, can take up to 4.5 months. and from overseas in different countries can take even 6 to 9 months to process a work permit. And I think Fernando had touched on this. One misconception of closed work permits is that the employee is tied to an employer. While that may be true, it is not permanently true, because if a temporary foreign worker does want to leave their current employer, they can apply to another producer or employer that has an LMIA or can obtain an LMIA, and they can submit an application online, and within about 10 days, they can start working for that new worker. That was a process that was introduced through COVID. It was a very positive step and continues to be a very positive step. Closed work permits do offer a sense of job security for the workers, as there's a contractual agreement between the employee and the employer. You know, it states agreed upon hours, rates of pay, accommodations, travel, and things like that. There are some cost nuances to the program. One in particular today is housing. We spent a lot of time with the ESDC discussing this, because currently today under the agricultural stream, you can only charge $30 a week for on-site housing, even if the employee lives in a 3-bedroom farmhouse alone. And then a little nuance is, if that employee chooses to move to town on their own behalf, that house must remain open in case they want to move back. So then if the employer needs to hire another temporary foreign worker, he has to rent another house. And I'm sure, as we know today, rent is not $30 per week. So we've been continuing to converse with the SDC on that, but thus far we've not reached any common ground. One of the other things we've spent many times talking about with the temporary foreign worker program with ESDC and Service Canada is to have a standalone program, an ag and agri-food program outside the temporary foreign worker program. These jobs have proven to be continually difficult to attract Canadians to, and in demand with the amount of recruiting we do. So if we could have a standalone program outside of the temporary foreign worker program, it would seem to make sense, and it might reduce some of the challenges from the public, being that it's such a political hot potato. And I think, in conclusion, on my opening statement here, is that closed work permits, they're good for balancing needs of workers and Canadians to ensure that there's a Canadians come first approach to the workforce. It also aids in getting workers to rural Canada, to the in-demand jobs that are needed there. And year-round employees have the opportunity to apply for permanent residency, and many of them stay with their families in a rural location, which is very helpful for Canada with the rural depopulation that's going on. And at that time, when they become a PR, their family members arrive, and some of those family members also work in the rural workplaces, which also increases the workforce. Immigration has been the backbone of Canada and continues to be part of our prosperity, so we need to ensure that we have immigration for rural Canada.
Mr. Chambers,
a program that works.
Your time is pretty well up a minute ago, so I would like you to come back. Before I go to the honourable members, as committee members, we are doing really well. Moving forward, if you have questions, if you can mention either it's to Mr. Bura, Madam Gagnon, or Mr. Pillow, or Mr. Chambers, that will help. And with this, my first speaker on the list is my dear friend Larry Maguire. Larry Maguire, you have 6 minutes, and then we'll go to Madam Kaibag after this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses today, and Mr. Fillion as well, for being here. I have some questions that I'd like to touch base on, and first I'll go to Mr. Chambers. Are you aware of any farmers that have asked the minister to introduce open work permits?
Mr. Chambers.
I am not. No.
And are you aware if the Liberal government has asked any farmer their thoughts on introducing open work permits?
No.
You mentioned the challenges that IRCC and the time lags. So succinctly as you can you please explain the costs and time associated with the issues of applying for an LMIA, recruiting a worker, and bringing them to Canada? Update us on that.
So it is quite a process. So if you're under the agricultural stream, which is primary agriculture only, the cost to apply for an LMIA is zero. If you're outside of the agricultural stream, such as a meat processing plant, which we at Sunterra have, the cost of each application is $1,000. So if you need 10 workers, that's a $10,000 check you write to the government. just to have the right to bring a foreign worker. Then on top of that, you've got to go overseas and try and recruit workers. So we do that, or we might use a third party in a foreign country to find workers for us. So of course, there's a cost that we have to pay that third party to do that. And that can be sometimes at the cost of $1,000 per employee. And then when you've got the worker, you send that information to the worker. They have to apply for a work permit overseas. So they submit that application. That gets processed. There's a cost to them, to the government, to the Canadian government. I think those costs are about $250 a day or somewhere around it, but don't quote me on that. And that takes a while. And then, of course, once they get the approval letter to come to Canada, you've got to arrange flights for them to bring them to Canada. And then on top of that, regardless of what stream they're in for housing, you've got to ensure that there's a house set up ready for them to go, equipped with everything that they're going to need. You've got to pick them up from the airport. And then when they do arrive, we make sure that they know where the grocery store is. We get them set up with banking, healthcare, where the post office is.
I'm going to have to move on. You've listed a ton
Mr.
of
Chambers,
Okay.
Mr. Maguire has other questions, so if you can keep your comments brief,
Sure.
I would
Sorry.
appreciate it. Mr. Maguire.
Sorry.
No, I like the
Apologies.
detail of your answer. That's what, but I want to move on. You made the point. There's quite a cost involved. The major concern being raised about introducing open work permits is the unpredictability and the risks of workers immediately changing jobs once they arrive in Canada. And you indicated, I think, in your comments that you shared that concern. Can you just confirm that?
Yeah,
Mr. Chambers.
for sure. That is a big concern, that someone could just basically stand at the airport and cherry pick all the work that someone else has done, and then you end up without a worker.
Persons would then try to find a job in a larger community, leave the rural community?
Yeah, that would definitely be a problem, because it's as we know today, most of the immigration and a lot of people like to be living in urban centres, and that's part of the issue of rural depopulation going on in Canada. So being able to bring a worker directly to rural Canada, it helps revitalise those communities.
And if the government created a sectoral open work permit, meaning the workers would still have to be employed in the same type of job with a different employer, do you have concerns that other companies would try to poach those workers?
That is a concern for sure. I mean, I think there needs to be more discussion around that, and with employers on how that exactly would work. And I think it needs to be narrowed down to the specific NOC code, not just the sector of agriculture, because, we need to bring people, if we're trying to bring people to fill jobs on hog barns, then that's the NOC code we need. And we don't want those guys leaving and to do something else in agriculture that there's not necessarily a shortage of.
And we want to protect, all of us in the committee here want to protect the workers. But rather than implementing open permits, do you have any recommendations to enhance the current system to better protect these workers?
Well, I personally think, I did mention in my opening remarks, that there's an opportunity that if employees feel that they're not happy where they are, they can apply to another employer. And actually, if those employees look on the job bank, because every employer that is trying to recruit temporary foreign workers will be advertising on the job bank. If they look on the job bank, they'll be able to find employers with LMIAs, and they can apply to them. And that's a 10-day process. Now, the government could create something a little quicker than that, where it's kind of click and print, where you go online, you apply for the permit, and you click and print it out, and you're done. And then the next day you could leave if you feel it's a problem. But there's also if workers feel that they're vulnerable and they need protecting, they can call the hotline, and then that triggers an investigation. And if the officer deems that the call warrant immediate action, they can grant that individual an open work permit, and they get removed from the workplace, and then an investigation occurs to the employer.
Yeah, the Canadian Bar Association has recommended that workers in their own language have access to clear and transparent information about their rights under the TFWP. I believe this isn't a bad idea, but do you support that recommendation?
I do. When workers arrive, we give them a pamphlet with all the information they need, including the hotline they can call if they feel there's a problem.
And our last comment is, the housing is an issue. From what I've seen in the last 5 years, it's improved considerably. Can you just expand on that?
Yeah, the challenge with the housing is the program under the agriculture stream. The program is for any on-site housing, all you can charge is $30 a week. Well, in essence, what that program starts driving you towards is to do more bunk-style housing, whereas in our organization, up until this point on the farms, we've encouraged at least everyone have their own bedroom, and sometimes you have a house because they bring their families, and then they transition to PR. Well, it doesn't make economic sense, $30 a week, and then you have the challenge when those workers want to move to town or buy their own house. There's a sticker shock because they've been immune to it with at such a low rate. So we need to try and find some common ground where that makes a little more sense on what can be charged.
Thank you, and it's 6:40. So we will go to Madam Kaibaga, then we'll go to Mr. Bruno de Sap afterwards. Madam Kaibaga, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Welcome to our witnesses to our committee. I would like to ask questions to Mr. Chambers. I was just curious to know, as the government launched the Open Work Permit for Vulnerable Workers program in June of 2019, since this opening, we've seen this year alone up to 1,320 work permits. What would you say are the different ways in which we can improve this program to better suit the needs of migrant workers facing abuse?
Mr. Chambers.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I am all for, if employers are abusing the program or abusing workers, they should be blacklisted and kicked out. And that currently exists. So if there's an investigation occurs through a complaint driven by a worker, and the employer is deemed to be significantly at fault or creating abusive situations, then that employer does get blacklisted and can no longer use a temporary foreign worker to hire workers. And I'm fully supportive of that, because what happens is you get a few situations where that occurs, and then everyone gets reduced to the lowest common denominator, and it affects the workers or the employers that want to use the program correctly. So I think we need to continue to push with that, but I think it needs to be swift and quick. But it's a double-edged sword, because the other part of that is some of the times, more recently, there's been a lot of occasions where there's been false accusations made, investigations have been done on employers, and there's actually no problems whatsoever. And the employer's been told by ESDC that you've got some problematic
Sorry to
employees.
cut you. I just want to make sure that I'm still within my
The honourable member.
time
Sorry.
limit.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I thank you for that feedback, and I was specifically talking about the workers who have been found to be abusive. Anyone here in the room can answer my next question, which is like the different ways, the different changes that we can bring, that you would suggest that we can bring to reinforce our government's ability to inspect employee compliance. And if you want to touch like high level within my time limit on the first question as well, I'd be happy to hear from you. Anyone really from
Who want to go first? Okay, Mr. Bura, go ahead.
I'll go quickly, and then I give time to my colleagues. I think the government is going on the right way with the changes that they made and in ESDC in order to be more present on the field with the subventions that they're giving to organizations in the field to help the workers better understand their rights with also activities for the workers. I think in Quebec there's 31 finance activities or organizations financed by the federal government. Also, I think the way that the restructure of ESDC to have more different divisions that are looking at different things of the program, I think that's helping in order to advance, and that the employers recognize their obligations towards the workers, and that the workers also get to learn their rights.
Madam Gagnon or Mr. Pilon, you have anything to say?
maybe I can ask the next question, Mr.
Sure.
Chair, and then they
Thank
can
you.
answer the next question, because I like the answer I got.
Certainly, Honourable Member, your time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, maybe Madam Gagnon can answer this question. If there are any measures that you would like to see the federal government implement to ensure that migrant workers are aware of the open work permit for vulnerable workers and their rights as workers here in Canada.
Madam Gagnon.
Merci.
Well, you can speak in French. Yes, thank you very much. I will indeed speak in French. Well, there are already measures at each arrival at the airport. We provide them with a booklet with all the statutes that apply to them. This is provincially regulated area, of course, so all the Quebec laws are clearly explained in the guidebook. They can also, in that logbook, note their working hours to ensure that they're properly paid in compliance with the contract. Now, when it comes to inspection, the biggest problem we have, and Mr. Pilon can elaborate on this, is prevention of occupational health and safety issues and workplace accidents. It's difficult to enforce those laws and regulations. Someone who is hurt in the workplace has to remain in Quebec, far from their family, because they don't have the money to go home to their country of origin to get health care. So there's been a number of complaints, and those complaints were substantiated. There have been a number of work permits that have actually been revoked. In May, for example, about 30 workers lost their work permits, and sometimes we even intervene with the police with us in the workplace. This isn't the case with all employers, as I said before, but unfortunately there's a small percentage of employers that hurt the entire sector in this way. As far as Quebec is concerned, we need to enhance the workplace inspection measures, spot visits, surprise visits, also planned visits, because otherwise when the inspector turns up, everything looks fine and dandy, everything's clean, everything's working properly, and then as soon as the inspector leaves, there's the same kind of subjugation. I understand. I know it's not the case of all employers, but I know that there were serious violations that have warranted our attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I don't think I have any more time left.
To Mr. Brunel-Desaep, then Madam Kwan afterwards. Mr. Brunel-Desaep, 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move a motion very quickly that we debated earlier, just to give more time to our witnesses. And the motion is that the committee invite the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship and the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs to appear as soon as possible together for 2 hours to answer the committee's questions concerning migrant trafficking and smuggling and the measures that the government intends to implement to put an end to these illegal activities that exploit vulnerable people and compromise their safety. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We'll discuss that later. Thank you. Welcome to the committee witnesses. Very quickly, if I may, we met early last year regarding a situation that scared us. Ratmac and myself and my team and Joel Lightbound's team and his office got together. There are a number of refusals of open work permits for vulnerable workers. Has that situation been resolved? And if so, what actually occurred? And if not, could you elaborate? Mr. Pilon. Yes, fortunately, after what you did and Mr. Lightbound did, we finally did get a favourable decision. And it happened in January. There were 8 refusals, and yet they seem to be similar files and cases to previous cases. But after you intervened, there was quite a radical change that came about. Well, we didn't find out what occurred exactly, did we? No, not really. We just know there's a number. We don't know which official made that decision. Count on me. I'm going to make sure we shed light on it. This isn't over and done and dusted. Now, another question. There are some good employers that who've seen our study on open work permits, and they say we're good employers. You shouldn't be pointing the finger at us. And I agree with that. Things are going well with most employers. But then, on the other hand, you have the UN rapporteur who said that the closed work permit system is a breeding ground for contemporary slavery. That's what he said. So clearly the status quo is no longer tenable. Please speak to the remarks made by the UN rapporteur and the closed work permit system. In your opinion, is that a blatant attack against all employers? Or please proceed. Mr. Pilon. No, it isn't an outright attack on all employers. The problem isn't the employers per se. It's the problem. It's a systemic problem, in my opinion. And unfortunately, since 2008, I've been looking after and advocating for these workers. I've seen all sorts of situations occur, and even slavery on our farms. I agree with you that the majority of workers are treating their workers properly. So as I said, the problem isn't the workers themselves per se, it's the problem with the system that needs overhauling, because currently it leads to situations like that which occurred to Mr. LeMay and other such situations. Now, if you're told by your employer, and this is really actually what he said, I paid for him, he belongs to me. Honestly, at some point you start to worry about that kind of thing. And we got those workers out of that situation, and the employer said that the employee escaped. And I was wondering at that point if there were bars in his bedroom window. If you're dealing with that kind of employer, honestly, those employers feel that the employee belongs to them. And those are exceptional cases. But as I said, Mr. LeMay, when we got him out last time, there were over 240 workers that are in the same boat. Now, of course, he lost his work permit, unfortunately. I don't know if you saw the bill. I was appeared on a TV program. Mr. LeMay went to the Caisse Populaire and is still doing this human smuggling kind of operation. These are workers who have tourism permits or illegal workers that he's hiring in kind of a worker trafficking that he's sending out to a number of farms. It's incredible. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, in Quebec, well, we had the UPA appear before us last week, and we have other farming representatives with us today. They talked about the roundtable for foreign agricultural workers that was put in place in 2008 alongside the FIRM organisation. It's kind of unique to Quebec, and it's multifaceted. Is that an example that the rest of Canada could emulate when it comes to that roundtable? And if perhaps you could explain it to the my colleagues around the table, exactly what it looks like. Well, thank you. Absolutely. Of course, we don't all have the same interests around the table, but there's a human rights tribunal, an occupational health and safety element to it, but it allows us together to put the finger on a number of problems and to make headway in resolving. There's also Agri-Carrière. There are other components to the group. There are unions that are also seated at the round table identifying these issues. And everyone agrees that it's not about pointing the finger at the culprits. It's about looking at what the problem is with the system. That's what we need to look at. Food security is important for Canada. It's important for Quebec. If we say to ourselves as a country that it's so important, why is it that the employers should be financing these workers that come from abroad? Maybe we really need to put our thinking caps on and think about that. UPA said this just as much last week. Food security has gotten worse in Quebec. We're down to 30%. I'm sorry, I've run out of time, but I'll have a second round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno de Sepp. Now we'll go to Madam Kwan. Madam Kwan, 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to say thank you to all the witnesses as well. I want to just carry on the conversation with the responses from Ms. Guénon and Mr. Fillon. On the issue around temporary foreign workers, as I understand you're indicating that it's a systems problem. The system, of course, creates an environment where there's an imbalance of power. The reality is that the temporary foreign workers have zero power. They're entirely reliant on their employer. If they complain about the employer, if they get fired from the job, they're actually in deep trouble because they're not making the money that they need to make to send home in other, to support other families, for example. So from that perspective, in that power imbalance environment, there can be abuse that'll occur, and you've cited some horrific examples to that end. In order to create a better balance of power, some advocates have advanced the notion of an open work permit. So that is to say then the employers would have to treat these employees fairly, and if they don't, they will move on to somewhere else. Some people argue to say that to have an open work permit, then that means that you can't keep them in the sector. They can go anywhere. But just like in all jobs, for you to be competitive, to get good workers, you actually have to pay them and have good employment conditions. So I wonder if you can comment about this need for system change. Would this open work permit option, should the government be considering an open work permit option for migrant workers?
Madam Gagnon or Mr. Pillon? Mr. Pillon.
Well, at RATMAC, our position is, well, we have the roundtable, as I mentioned earlier, and we've discussed the matter at length with UPA, with CIMM, with our colleague who's sitting here next to us, and we are in favour of an open work permit. But we would favour even more a sectoral work permit. In the agricultural sector, if we had overnight an open work permit, some people would prefer to go and work somewhere like a supermarket at $22 an hour rather than getting the minimum wage on a farm. So it is important to have a sectoral work permit. We would be very much open to that. The only thing is we don't want to define what those sectors are. That is crucial. I don't want them to turn into closed work permits because the sectors are too constraining. But if a worker had issues in a farm, they should be able to turn to another farm and offer their services to them. But it could apply to other sectors as well.
I can jump in on my question because I have limited time. So you noted that you support an open work permit, although you would want to see a sectoral open work permit. And your comment was to say that if there was a general open work permit, then the workers could choose, for example, to go and work for a grocery store as a cashier, as an example. Maybe that's the case, maybe that's not the case in terms of the competition. But doesn't that raise the question then, though, if wage is the issue, then shouldn't the employer at the farm be increasing their wages so that they can attract the workers? I say this with all sincerity. Actually, I'm an immigrant. I come from an immigrant family. My mother immigrated, our whole family immigrated here. When my mother first went to work, she worked as a farm worker. We had permanent resident status. She went out and worked as a farm worker. She made $10 a day to support a family of 8. So that is the reality. And you're right, after 2 years, she got some work experience. Then she moved to the next stage as a minimum wage worker, as a dishwasher at a restaurant until she retired at 65. So you're right. So people do look for better opportunities as they gain more experience. But doesn't that raise the whole point that when you, as an employer, want to attract workers, that you need to actually have good working conditions as well as competitive wages in order to attract the workers and to retain them?
Mr. Gagnon. Oh, no, sorry, Mr. Pillon. Madam Gagnon, sorry.
Pour répondre rapidement.
Well, in response to your question, RATMAC is a member of the Coalition for Minimum Wage in Quebec, and to our mind, clearly a minimum wage must go higher. It's well below the poverty line currently. Now, the coalition is now talking about $18, but even $20 an hour for a minimum wage in Quebec. At least that's what the coalition is advocating for, and we are in favour of an increase to the minimum wage too in Quebec.
No, the employer, of course, have the choice to not just stick with the minimum wage. They can offer higher wages right off the top and not just go with what is the minimum wage requirement. I certainly support minimum wages going up. People cannot live on minimum wages, and that is absolutely the reality. On the open work permit question as well, right now the government actually allows for people to get an open work permit if they're subject to abuse, and that's after they have already experienced the abuse. Then they can actually get an open work permit. You don't see people fleeing the sector. I have known workers who's been subject to abuse, and actually with the help of the union, particularly with the UFCW, they went to other employers who were not abusing them, and they stayed in the sector. These workers want to work. They want to make a good living to support themselves and that of their family. So on the notion of an open work permit, the idea that we just got to hold onto an environment so that they cannot leave with sectoral open work permit or closed work permit, isn't that in and of itself part of the abuse of the system?
The time is up, Mr. Pillon, if you can quickly answer the question, or Madam Gagnon. Go ahead, please. Quick answer.
Merci.
Thank you. It's very important, the contribution you've just made, because even from a union standpoint, there's a problem with the system. Let me give you a very concrete example. There is a hothouse where there are thousands of workers, but there are no Quebec natives because the working conditions are so poor and the wages are so low. And there was a Mexican worker that wasn't even called back this year to take up his contract again. So they're even learning their right, losing their right to organise collectively. So that's a problem with the system. The problem with the open work permits for vulnerable persons is that those individuals are blacklisted. They're not called. We follow up with them in Guatemala, in Mexico. There's going to be an international conference in December on this very matter. And we need to address that issue. Thank you very much.
Go to Mr. Comich for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go to Mr. Chambers first. Mr. Chambers, you had briefly mentioned farm inspections. And I wanted to ask you, what was the experience both your company but also the producers in your sector have had with the program in 2022 and 2023?
The short and curly is a little bit frustrating because if you've got a report of a situation at work, so it triggers an inspection, everything that is in the works is on hold at that point in time. So you're guilty until proven innocent. And I think the program kind of works backwards, because what it should be is, as you know, Canadian law, innocent until proven guilty. So when an inspection occurs, business should be able to carry. If you've got LMIA applications in process, those should continue to go through the process of being approved and so on and so forth. If you're deemed to be at fault, it might be just a re-education and that can be corrected. But if you're deemed to be significantly problematic, then again, I'm all for being booted out of the program if you're way offside and creating a vulnerable situation. And you know, to add to that, I think sometimes a little bit of what happened is some employees are making reports of situations which are untrue. I know personally our company's had some inspections done and audits done, and we've passed with flying colors. And it's the same employee reporting different things which they're unsubstantiated.
So ESDC's program, from the data I have, it's between April 1st, 2022 to November 28th, 2022. 95% of these farm inspections are being done to look at the conditions, the working conditions, after a complaint has been made. They're being done virtually. Is that your experience as well, that a lot of these inspections are still being done virtually?
Mr. Chambers.
Yes, that's our experience.
And what do you think of that? What do employers think of that?
I think if it can be done virtually, that's fine. But I think if someone is reporting a problem in the workplace, if it's in a greenhouse, if it's in a farm, then it would only make sense for somebody to get there, look at it firsthand. But you have to understand that individual then has to understand the business. Like, you know, you can't come onto a hog farm, for example, and someone says it's dusty, and then someone from Ottawa show up and go, oh, yes, it is dusty. Well, of course it's dusty. It's a pig farm with feed.
Mr. Chambers, just going to move on. Pour les témoins qui sont ici dans la salle avec nous.
For the witnesses here in person, the investigators training program in 2002, based on the figures that I got from the department, there are only about 700 individuals that received the requisite training to be able to become investigators and go to farms to look at the working conditions. Do you think that's sufficient to formulate a proper opinion? Do you think that there should be in-person or virtual inspections? Apparently, 95% of producers' inspections are conducted virtually. What do you make of that? Take turns, if you will. So thank you very much for the question. At RATMAC, we often file complaints federally. The big problem with those complaints is not that it's done virtually, it's that we never get any feedback about the complaints. We're told that they're confidential. So it's difficult to file complaints and continue to want to do so when there's no feedback whatsoever. And when we speak to the workers out in the field, they don't observe any change even after the complaints are filed. So there's clearly an issue here. Okay, confidentiality is an issue, but when we do file complaints, we want feedback. We want to know if an investigator has gone to the farm, to the workplace. We don't know anything. All we know that there is supposedly an investigation. How many complaints did I file on behalf of Mr. LeMay? There was an investigation. He did lose his permit, but that said, Mr. Torres.
Pour nous affirmer, je pense que les
Well, inspections in person would be much appreciated. I think that most of our members are good employers, and I think that they should be focusing less on the administrative issues and have more investigators out in the field to really testify to what's going on in real life. In Quebec, after 6 or 7 months of work, apparently there are 11 visits in that entire period by inspectors that have been made. So that's from the 1st of April in 2002. Perhaps this has changed, but I have no real confidence that it has. But between that period, April and 22nd of September, there have been 11. Don't you think it should be far higher?
I appreciate it.
Yeah. For us, it's always
For us, it's really important that these investigators be on site in person. We go to great lengths to ensure that employers understand their obligations and that workers understand their rights. And we want to demonstrate to the government that we're doing things properly. At least on behalf of these workers that we're advocating for, we're working hand in hand with the UPA, with RATMAC, to ensure that both workers and employers understand their respective obligations and rights.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmich. We will go to Mr. Ali for 5 minutes, then Mr. Blumenthal for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for their time appearing before the committee to give their input on these very important topics. My question is to Mr. Chambers. Can you expand on the impact of labor shortages on the agricultural industry, please?
Mr. Chambers.
Apologies, I was muted there. Yes, I mean some work that that was done and put together by the Canadian Ag HR Council reveals that ag lost an estimated on-farm ag business lost an estimated 3.5 billion in sales in 2022 because they didn't have enough workers. And in that survey, they also found that the ag sector has an above average vacancy rate of 7.5%, with 2 in 5 employers saying they couldn't find the workers they needed.
Thank you again, Mr. Chambers. The 2024-2026 immigration levels plan tabled by the minister show his intention to bring economic migrants to Canada, with the goal of having 60% of new permanent residents as part of the economic class by 2026. Pilot programs such as the Agri-Food Pilot, which was extended until May 2025, as well as the Atlantic Immigration Program, the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, to name a few, are key component of the economic class. In your opinion, have these pilot programs, especially the Agri-Food Pilot, been helpful to transition temporary foreign workers?
Mr. Chambers.
Yes, in certain areas, they're helpful in transitioning permanent residents. I mean, our business, Sunterra Farms, is in Alberta, and we've had very good success with the provincial nomination program or rural renewal program to transition folks to permanent residency. The Ag and Agri-Food Immigration Pilot has been becoming more helpful because they're focusing more on in-demand jobs versus education. And the in-demand jobs definitely need filling, and a lot of them are in rural Canada. So I mean, for us, immigration has always been a cornerstone of our business when we bring temporary farm workers to transition that way. And if we can get them working in rural Alberta and then become a permanent resident, there's a much higher probability that they'll stay in rural Alberta.
Thank you. What measures would you like to see the government implement to assist the agricultural industry's ability to recruit?
Mr. Chambers.
Ability to recruit. I mean, I think, I'm not sure whether, is that ability to recruit foreign workers or Canadians?
Foreign workers.
Foreign workers. So I think our ability to recruit foreign workers is there today as a business. That's fine. I mean, it's just some of the nuances with the program to ensure it's streamlined. And there are some positives coming out of the program, such as the recognized employer model today, which is going to help streamline recruiting temporary foreign workers for sure. But the biggest thing that would be helpful would be IRCC's component, the actual processing of work permits. That is a big stumbling block today and the biggest bottleneck of all.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
You have a minute and a quarter.
Okay, this question to anyone, any of the witnesses. In 2022, 77% of the work permits issued by IRCC were open, while the only 23% were employer-specific or closed work permits. Certain employers have expressed that employer-specific worker permit have a specific purpose. For instance, employers in need of workers with high-demand skills who recruit temporary foreign workers fear that without employer-specific permits, they may lose the employees they had recruited and desperately need. Do you believe that employer-specific work permits coupled with increased measures to protect temporary foreign workers are necessary in certain circumstances?
20 seconds answer. Anyone? Please go ahead. Okay, Mr. Bora.
I believe yes for our sector in Quebec, the agricultural farmers. They need a certain amount of workers for specific periods, for specific work that they have to be done at the farm. And if there's no protection, I think one of the main reasons why the program has been successful for the employers is because they know that the number of workers that they needed for let's say seeding or planting, the number of workers is there. If there's no guarantee that the workers are going to be there in the number that they need, perhaps there will be a change in agriculture, because if an employer has to invest money to prepare the food, but it is not guaranteed that he's going to have the people, so maybe he's going to reduce the amount of...
Thank you very much, Mr. Bura. We'll go to Mr. Bruno de Sep for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'll be very quick. Now, when there are good employers, sincere employers, and they tell us that were we to abolish the closed work permit system, they're going to be forced to shut up shop. It'll cost them so much to bring in these temporary foreign workers, they're afraid that they'll go elsewhere. And these are sincere employers that are telling us this. What do you say to those employers? Well, thank you. What I tell them, and this isn't complicated, even in an open work permit, if they're good employers and if they provide good working conditions, good accommodation, I'm sorry, but it's the opposite. The employees are going to want to work there rather than leave. So it's the very opposite to what he's claiming. But there are folks, unscrupulous guys like Jean Lemay, and their employees will go elsewhere and look for better conditions. And I've sat on a advocacy roundtable with employers, and I tell them all the time, these open work permits, they're not complicated. They're going to want to come back and work for you for the precise reason that you offer good working conditions. And what do you say to folks in the regions like in Lac-Saint-Jean, where I come from, that there'll be more and more workers wanting to go to urban centres because they won't be interested in going to our regions? There's a youth exodus even within Quebec in Canada. So are we right to have misgivings in that regard? Well, that is why we are open to an open sectoral work permit. Well, I agree with what Michel just said. That said, there are good employers that lost workers that went to get a different job. We don't know if they went to the United States or if they went to work illegally in Montreal. They were good employees. that, or good employers rather, and yet their employees work. Is there a problem with Mexican cartels? Your thoughts? I don't know if they're cartels per se, but for the past couple of years, there have been workers that have abandoned their jobs, about 500 last year. I'm talking about members of my organisation, 500 workers that left without giving any warning to their employers. And this year, it's already up to 300. So yes, there are workers that leave the farm and don't go. We don't know where they go. What about on cartels, Mr. Pilon?
Thank you. Madam Kwan, we will go for 2.5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to continue on with Ms. Gagnon. You were talking about earlier about employees getting blacklisted. If you make a complaint, you get blacklisted. That's something that we've also heard from other witnesses as well. So from that perspective, this whole concept of filing a complaint, while in theory is supposed to work, but in reality is also fraught with problems. So do you have any suggestions to the government on how to address that issue?
Madam Gagnon.
Well, we're trying to develop alliances. We know that upstream we have colleagues in Mexico and Guatemala who are negotiating with the various governments to have ethical selection systems. There's the Verity program in Mexico, which is one example. But we'll never be able to completely wipe out that scourge. It's difficult to prove these cases because we don't have access to all the information we need. Now, in Quebec, we weren't part of the pilot project on sectoral work permits. I just wanted to slip that in. So our assessment is fairly nuanced. We want to see how this plays out in real life. Now, let's remember that the Canada-Quebec Accord of 78 didn't include the whole idea of closed work permits. So this is a completely new thing in the landscape, and it's fraught with problems, as you say.
You know, Canada used to have a program that actually brought in workers for the full range of skills. And so whether what the NOC considers as low skill to now what's considered high skill, but the full range of skilled workers are brought to Canada with permanent resident status. But they've done away with that. Now it's primarily focused in on really the higher skill, so-called higher skill levels, even though these workers that you're talking about are essential workers. So would you advocate or support the call for the government to bring back an immigration policy for permanent resident status for the full range of skill set that Canada needs for our labor market?
Madam Gagnon or Mr. Pilon? Go ahead, Madam Gagnon.
Oui, tout à fait.
Well, absolutely. Not only does the stream towards permanent residency need to be improved, and those who are in the regions want to stay in the regions. We have a member on our board who worked in Rimouski, Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, and who wants to stay in the regions because he learnt his French in the regions. He's built friendships in the regions. So it's not an issue, in our opinion. On the contrary, if you allow that kind of mobility, it's not an issue, and it strikes me as being a fundamental right that Canada recognises, and Canada's signed a whole host of conventions on that very issue.
Madam Kwan. And with this, on behalf of the committee members, as its chair, I would like to thank Mr. Chambers, Mr. Pilon, Madam Gagnon, and Mr. Bora for being here and sharing an important information with us. Thank you. And with this, we will suspend the meeting for a few minutes before we get into in-camera meeting.